and welcome to our Sizigi Talk live session with Zager, my dear mentor and my friend. Phil works at Booz Allen Hamilton as a consultant, as a transportation specialist consultant, and his job includes developing strategies for ensuring safe international aviation, the responsible introduction of bleeding-edge technology, procuring and delivering complex systems, and building institutions and infrastructure in developing countries. He has previously worked as a consultant at the Global Indicators Group at the World Bank, where his work focused on why projects fail, along with governance and risk in procurement and infrastructure. He's an attorney with large law firm experience that includes comparative corporate law, cross-border mergers and acquisitions, and esoteric financial products. He has a bachelor's degree in economics and international from USC, fight on, master's degree in international affairs from Johns Hopkins, SAIS, and a JD degree from Georgetown. Welcome to our Sizigi Talk live session, Phil. Thank you so much for accepting to be a part of this session.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Also, to all of our audience, you can ask any questions anytime you want, and we will be answering them as soon as you ask them. So let's start with our first question. How did you find your way into the consulting industry, Phil?
Thank you. It's kind of a long story, but I'll give the short version now. Initially, I was working for a law firm working on international mergers and acquisitions, but I realized what I was more interested was kind of infrastructure and sort of more of a not just giving legal advice, but kind of a more holistic approach, making sure that solutions were found. And so I was at the World Bank working on the Doing Business report, additionally working on a pilot project, which has only gained momentum in the last couple of years, about why projects fail. I had a friend at Booz Allen who was involved in a project where they were helping the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a U.S. development agency, with a road project in Liberia. And the pitch was, well, you're studying why projects fail. Do you want to help with an actual project? And so with that, I joined Booz Allen about 2.5 years ago. And as mentioned in the very generous introduction, have sort of shifted from just international development to also looking at aviation and especially how to regulate, introduce, and safely integrate new technology.
That's a very cool story. And our second question is, what do you think about the hiring process of the consulting industry, and what do you think could be improved?
So as mentioned earlier, I kind of came into the consulting industry sideways. Yeah. I was lucky in that, and this is something where, and I live in Washington, D.C., and this is something where, for better or for worse, the way many industries work, it's not just consulting. And a certain level, it's who you know. But that also was me as an experienced hire. I was several years out of my advanced degrees when I joined consulting. But I think in terms of the hiring process, I think what's really challenging is just, especially for undergrads, how to differentiate yourself. Because especially with the name brand firms, we all know who they are. There's a real sort of challenge of, it's a little like applying to a high-level college in that there's only so many slots.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's a real challenge, is just how do you differentiate yourself? And especially on the firm side, what qualities are you looking for? Because if you're, and this also depends firm by firm, because some firms have a model where the hope is, especially law firms, what it was 40 years ago, where you join a firm in your mid-20s and you're there until you retire in your 60s. And so, especially for firms that invest in people and invest in training, there's a sense of, okay, is this person here to just check a box on their resume, or is this a person here that you can really invest in and who's going to be able to rise through the ranks? Which is hard to predict.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's very difficult. And the hiring process right now is actually a little too impersonal, I would say. That's why it all feels like a lottery from a candidate's perspective.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think what makes it especially challenging is the virtual aspect of it. And also especially even the more soft skills. And historically in consulting, one thing that comes up is sort of for example, handshakes, where you could tell, okay, this person understands how to behave. And especially as you're younger, coming through the ranks, recognizing that if you're 21, you understand how to give a real handshake. If you understand how to appropriately make small talk with somebody who's as old as your parents, that's a real skill. But it's incredibly hard to sort of indicate that skill and show what you know in a virtual environment.
No, exactly. I agree with you. And let's move on to our third question. So, as a consultant, what do you think are the habits of a highly effective consultant?
I think, well, it's less so a habit, but more a state of mind. I think attitude is very important because, and that's sort of what's really challenging and exciting about consulting, is that day to day, you really don't know what's going to happen. But what you see is with the people who are more effective and rise up is a real sense of their attitude is, okay, this is a new challenge. I'm going to embrace it. Not, well, okay, I learned how to do this in school, but I'm not confident doing it. There's a sense of not only recognizing, okay, if I don't know something, you have a choice of either you sort of curl into a ball and hope it goes away, or you're going to reach out to somebody who actually knows a bit more. And I think that's another part of where attitude comes in, is understanding that you're not going to know everything immediately, but especially for more technical things, at least Google it before you ask someone senior. And just that attitude of trying to find an answer. And even if you don't find the answer, just knowing that you've done your homework.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. There are a lot of people who are emailing them, texting, like DMing them on LinkedIn and everything. So like, you really had to do your homework before reaching out to them.
And just one side point. This was something when I was looking for jobs that I heard as a piece of advice. When you're networking, especially, don't use the phrase "pick your brain." That's kind of vague and unhelpful. And this goes back to the idea of doing your homework. Is if somebody works for an organization, one question that I like to ask if I don't know that much is, what's the culture like? Because, and once again, it's that sense of nobody needs to hear their LinkedIn repeated back to them. You ask these questions you can't Google.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Sometimes, like, as candidates, we are so clueless. Like, we don't know what to do. But this tip is a great one. So we actually have a question from Sebastian. He asked, do you have any specific advice for candidates going through the virtual recruiting process?
Yeah, I think the most specific piece of advice is, and I was very fortunate in which Booz Allen gave a training in kind of virtual communication that I was fortunate to attend, is recognize that, and especially in a virtual environment, you're not in an office, it's a set. So, for example, just I think two sort of specific examples on that. One, be aware of your background. So for me, I recognize that behind me, I'm sitting on my couch. I recognize this isn't super formal, but I have fairly peaceful, calm landscape pictures behind me. It's not distracting. Thank you. Let's see. That one's Yosemite, that one's Abu Dhabi, but
I miss California so much.
You and me both. So I think that's the first thing, is number one, just recognize that your background comes into play in ways that a year ago, if you wore a suit and your tie was not, if for men especially, if your tie wasn't tied correctly, people would know. Similar things with backgrounds. If you have, I'm just giving a specific example because it was bad and I've seen it recently. Like if you have a large poster of your favorite football player from high school, that's going to be super distracting. Like you might love Messi, but that really doesn't help you with recruiting. And I think the second thing is,
as a conversation starter.
It can be, but just recognize, think about, and I recognize this is challenging now, but think about the backgrounds and what an office would look like for an executive. Now, you're right. It's this very challenging balance. And frankly, I don't think anyone's figured it out yet, because you want to show a little personality, because in a virtual environment, you don't have that sort of, you're hanging out in the elevator, you're talking, you have that ability to make small talk, but you don't want to have so much in the background that it distracts from you. And And then I guess the second part of that answer is one thing that can be really helpful about virtual interviewing is you can record yourself. Record yourself answering the sort of first question, tell me a little about yourself. And it can be really difficult and unpleasant to watch. I know personally, I tend to just kind of go without pausing.
Same.
But if you're in a virtual environment, you're not going to have the same sort of feedback you would normally, where you can kind of see your interviewer sort of rolling their eyes. So I think that's another big thing is record yourself. Try to understand how you look to someone watching you on camera.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, definitely. And Sizigi actually has an e-portfolio. You can create an e-portfolio on Sizigi, and you can actually practice that interview, creating your portfolio, and watch yourself and see for yourself how you look on camera also, which is also a great experience to have before going into an interview. And my last question to you, Phil, will be what areas of government consulting are especially in demand nowadays?
So I think the two big areas of government consulting that strike me are, number one, anything involving cloud computing. I know the Pentagon recently, and this is still being argued out between Google and Amazon, had a big contract named, and I only remember the acronym, JEDI, which I believe was for $10 billion. And so, and especially in the last 6 months, how everything's become virtual, I think understanding how that works, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be a great computer scientist, but sort of having a sense of how things work in a distributed environment, especially because, I mean, I don't know when we're going back to the office, a lot of us don't. And then the flip side of that, I think, is a real sense, especially in government consulting, especially after the OPM breaches, cybersecurity. Once again, you don't have to be a great hacker. You don't have to be an incredible expert in it, but just have a basic sense as to, okay, why shouldn't we send passwords over email? Why do we need to use a VPN? What is a VPN? I think those are two areas which are really valuable. And I think, especially as the things become more virtual, are only going to get more and more important.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And we actually have another question from the audience. Anna Maria asked, are there any new technologies that Booz Allen interns are utilizing?
So I can't speak for interns, but I can speak for Booz Allen more generally. And this is public, so I'm perfectly happy to share this. But Booz Allen earlier this year rolled out an artificial intelligence platform called Modzzy, MODZY.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that to me too.
So I think what's really exciting about it is because it's a platform, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. So I think, and I'm not 100% sure how interns fit into it, but I think that Modzzy in particular strikes me sort of specifically as an example of a new technology being integrated, but also more generally. And I think what is worth noting about artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence goes through hype cycles every so often. And I think what's worth noting is just, once again, you don't have to be a great coder, but understand basic principles in terms of machine learning, understand in terms of how the data sets work, understand sort of my personal favorite example of artificial intelligence and practices. If you filled out a form in Google in the last couple of years, how the CAPTCHA says identify the streetlights, identify the crosswalks. The reason it does that is so to train self-driving cars. And so, and I think that's, I guess at a very high level, one aspect of artificial intelligence that's really interesting is understanding that connection between artificial intelligence and human inputs. Same principle of Google Translate.
Exactly. We have another question from Anna Maria, if you have time.
Sure.
With cloud computing, should we be looking into Azure? She asked.
I mean, and I'm not an expert, but I think what's interesting is by Azure, I assume you mean Microsoft Azure as opposed to Amazon Web Services. And I don't want to give away too much information, but it seems like there is definitely a push, especially in certain areas, to either A, consolidate things under Microsoft, or to B, reduce dependency on Amazon. So, and once again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert in this field, but it seems like from what I've seen of friends who are experts in this field, there definitely is an aspect of having a bit of sort of cross training in terms of, and I think this is probably a fair piece of advice, is if you become too dependent on one piece of technology, then that limits your ability to market yourself. So even if you're a world-class expert in AWS, having some familiarity with Microsoft Azure is going to help you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Phil, for answering all our questions, answering my questions, our audience's questions. Thank you for this insightful conversation. And with your interview, we are concluding the consulting themed Sizigi Talk Lives. And I want to remind all of our audience that we will be holding a pitch competition as Sizigi, and the winner of the pitch competition will get an 8-week strategy consulting internship opportunity. So go sign up for that, please. And I also want to remind you guys that our raffle winners will be announced on Instagram today. So keep an eye on that too. Thank you so much, Phil, again. Have a great day.